Sam Ward stood at his window, his weathered hands resting against the sill, watching as dusk folded itself over the land. 45 winters had worn through him, but this one lingered heavier than most. A patch of grey had claimed his beard at the chin, and his shoulders sagged beneath the invisible load of loss. 3 years back, he'd buried his wife beneath the cottonwood that leaned over the creek like a body bent by grief. Since that day, Sam had embraced the silence, not because his voice had left him, but because there was no longer anyone worth hearing it. The cabin still carried her echo. Her shawl, loosely woven, hung on a chair he never touched. A row of herbs, once lovingly arranged, lay dry and crumbling on the shelf. He slept on his side of the bed, the other stiff with cold. There had once been a child, too, a daughter who never drew a breath. After that, the cradle he'd carved was left to rot. Instead, he fixed fences, stitched saddles, and kept his distance. The townsfolk muttered about the silent man who came once each month and only spoke when coin changed hands. Some believed sorrow had unhinged him. Others thought he'd always been broken. That night, as dusk bruised into true dark, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the wind. Soft, stuttering. At first he thought it might be a coyote wounded on the frozen ground. Habit guided his hand to the shotgun, not fear. When he stepped out, he saw her, sprawled in the snow beneath the cedar beside the barn, curled like something the storm had abandoned. Her sleeve was torn, her arm soaked red from shoulder to wrist, barefoot and still, young as spring. She reminded him of the deer he'd once hunted when food was scarce. He stared at her for a long while, the way a man does when he doubts what he sees. Then he lowered the gun. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask what brought her here. He only gathered her up, careful as if she might dissolve in his arms. She weighed less than sorrow and smelled of ash and river water. Carrying her across the threshold felt like ushering a storm into the house. He laid her near the hearth and wrapped her in the one blanket that didn't hold her scent. She stirred faintly, lips cracked and whispering in a tongue he didn't know but felt in his marrow. Comanche, maybe. He hadn't seen their kind in years, not since soldiers swept the land in peace's name. But this girl, no older than 20, bore the look of someone fleeing more than war. He filled a basin and washed the blood from her with steady hands. Her wound was deep but clean. It had drained her, not doomed her. He stitched her skin with the calm of someone who'd done this before the battles, before the crops, before the long emptiness. Her eyes followed him, half-lidded. She flinched once when the needle bit. He said nothing. Neither did she. When he was done, he stepped out, hands wet with blood and snow, to breathe the wind clean. The moon hung high, casting the cedar's shadow long. His wife had once adored that tree. She'd planted flowers at its base each spring. They'd stopped blooming the year she died. Inside, the girl had edged closer to the flames, asleep now, breath shallow but steady. Sam stood in the doorway a while, one hand pressed against the frame, then sat in his chair by the fire. He didn't sleep. He didn't look at her. He just stared into the flames and remembered how it felt to share a room with another person's breath. He told himself she'd be gone come morning. But dawn broke, and she was still there. She woke before the light did, springing upright like someone used to danger. Sam had left a bit of cornbread and jerky on a plate beside her. She snatched it fast, like a creature trapped. He sat at the table with his coffee, not watching, but aware. When her eyes met his, there was no plea, no thanks, just a quiet tension, a standoff of survival. "You're safe here," he said, voice brittle with dust. "For now." She didn't answer, but she didn't flee either. The snow thickened that day. Sam fed the stock, broke ice for the troughs, moved with the same rhythm he always had. When he returned, the hearth had been swept, the blanket folded neat. He caught her eyeing the cupboard, the shelves of beans and flour. Hunger was a silent visitor, but it left marks. That evening, he cooked stew, pork, onion, beans. She ate slowly, with care, each bite like ritual. He noticed her favor, one side of her mouth, likely a bruise beneath her dark hair. He didn't ask who had done it. She didn't say. That night the wind rose like something mourning itself. He fed the fire and gave her the bed, took the chair for himself. It wasn't kindness, he told himself, just necessity, practicality. That was all it had been. The bed was warmer. She needed warmth to heal, and she was healing. Nothing more. But in the dead center of the night, Sam stirred to find her at the window, outlined by the firelight like a carving in shadow. Her gaze swept the darkness outside, searching the horizon. Vigilant, he rose, his movements slow and creaking. "You expecting trouble?" he asked. She turned then, her eyes finding his in the glow. The silence between them thickened, brittle as ice on a creek. Then, after a moment that felt carved from stone, she nodded. Sam had met trouble before. War, hunger, death. But this felt like a different kind. This wasn't his trouble, and yet somehow it was already living in his home. He crossed the room, pulled a blanket from the chair. "You'll stay tonight," he said. "We'll sort the rest when the sun's up." She looked at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. Not trust, not quite, but also not fear. He returned to his chair, leaned his head back, and let the fires pop and hiss lull him. Outside, the wind battered the walls. Inside, something had shifted. He couldn't name it, but the silence no longer felt like grief. By the time the first pale edge of dawn stretched across the plains, Sam was already outside with the horses. Snow crunched beneath his boots, breath clouding the air. He hadn't seen new tracks in weeks, but today his lungs caught as he spotted them. Hoofprints, fresh, circling the cabin like rope tightening. He raised his eyes to the ridge and saw them. Riders, dozens, painted faces, spears catching the morning light. At their front, one figure stood out, tall in the saddle, a cloak flying like black wings. Comanche. Sam's chest pulled tight, not with panic, but a hard, clean certainty. He turned without hurry and stepped back toward the house. Inside, the girl stood by the hearth, face pale, eyes wide, but not shocked. She knew, she had always known. He didn't speak, neither did she. But something passed in that moment, a recognition that they were both caught now. No more hiding, no more running. The sun pushed higher, casting long slashes of pink light across the snow. The world felt hollow, every sound stretched thin and brittle. Sam stood still in the yard, hand on the fence, the other cradling a dented tin cup, gone cold in his grip. He sipped, but didn't taste, watching the line of the land like a man awaiting a verdict. The quiet deepened. No birds called, no animals stirred. Even the wind had paused, the sky itself holding its breath. Then, a flicker, a shimmer on the edge of sight, dust rising in slow curls. He heard it before he saw it, hooves steady and low like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He didn't move right away, just set the cup down on the fence post with deliberate care, as if trying not to wake an old ghost. Then finally, he turned and walked back toward the house, boots soft in the snow. Inside, she was wrapping her arm with fresh linen, her braid loose down her back. Her movements were efficient, calm. There was alertness in her now, not panic, but readiness. "They're here," Sam said. She looked up, and her face shifted, not with fear, but distance, like she'd already crossed the next hill in her mind. He reached up, fingers brushing the Winchester above the door. But he didn't lift it, just let his hand fall. The rifle wouldn't serve now. He stepped out again, and this time, she followed. They crested the ridge like a rising tide, horses and riders, 60 or more. Silent. Snow absorbed the sound of hooves, making their arrival eerie, like a dream half-remembered. They moved as one, formation tight, their bodies swaying in unison with their mounts. At the center rode the man in black wolf fur, red paint streaking his face like blood tears. His horse bore feathers, braided into its mane, stained with ash and ochre. His expression was carved from something older than anger, stone, smoke, and history. He reined in a dozen paces from the house. The others spread in a wide, unspoken arc, forming a circle around them. Not a threat, a claim. Sam felt it. The girl stepped forward before he could stop her. Her voice was soft, but solid. "Father," she said. The man didn't reply right away. His gaze swept over her, unreadable, and then landed on Sam. Sam didn't flinch. His hands hung at his sides. His boots were rooted. He offered no words. None would have meant anything. The moment stretched until the wind returned, sifting through the riders like it too wanted to know the end. Then the Comanche leader spoke, voice low and solemn. "You sheltered her." It wasn't a question. Sam nodded, slow and deliberate. The man dismounted, each step quiet in the snow. He walked with purpose. The way some approach war, others prayer. When he stopped, he was close enough to touch, close enough to see the years written in both of their faces. The girl stepped. Between them, the silence held like a drawn bow. "She chose not to return," the girl said, quietly, but with a certainty that needed no volume. None of the warriors moved. Sam didn't either. The father's gaze shifted, first to his daughter, then back to Sam. "She crossed into death," he said, voice low and worn, "and you gave her breath again." Sam shook his head. "I didn't give her anything," he replied. "She took it back herself." The Comanche chief studied him for a long, unmoving moment. Something changed in his face, not a softening, but a recalibration, a measuring of the man who had stood between silence and survival. Slowly, he lifted his hand. Sam's spine went stiff, but it was only to touch the girl's chin, gently. "You are not a child," he said to her, "and still, I hoped to decide for you." She didn't flinch. "I didn't run from you," she said. "I ran from men who took more than they were owed." The words hung heavy in the air, like a storm just beyond hearing. The chief turned his gaze toward the prairie behind Sam's land, an expanse knotted with history, blood, and broken treaties. When he looked back, his voice was flat. "My warriors will not strike today." A flicker of relief passed through the girl's frame, barely visible like thaw beneath frost. But Sam didn't ease. He heard the rest, even before it came. "But they may return," the chief continued. "Not in peace," his eyes locked on Sam. "You have 3 days. Then I come not as a father, but as a chief." With no more words, he turned, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. There was no cry, no signal, but the circle of warriors responded like water drawn to current. Their horses turned, snow churning under hooves. The sound muffled, yet immense. Within moments, they were gone. Nothing left but churned white, and the echo of something ancient. Sam stood in the stillness, watching until even the last rider vanished into the haze at the edge of the world. Only then did he breathe. Not deep, just enough. Inside, the fire had dimmed. The room had grown cold again. He dropped more wood into the hearth. The girl sat on the bed's edge, face unreadable. "You should go with them," he said. His voice wasn't hard. It wasn't even reluctant. Just real. She looked up, eyes steady. "And go where? Back to silence? Back to marrying a man who sees me as a dowry with legs?" Her words came quiet, not bitter, resigned. He had no answer, she added, almost to herself. "You gave me a room that didn't lock. That was enough." Sam turned back to the fire, poking at it, though it didn't need tending. He couldn't meet her eyes too long, not without feeling something shift deep under the surface, something he didn't have a name for. 3 days. He began counting them like rations, like the grains of a glass turned over by fate, each moment a step closer to losing her, or to something he didn't yet understand. That evening, as the wind howled across the chimney like a beast pacing the rafters, Sam sat by the window, a mug cradled in his hands, eyes lost in the blur of frost against glass. His heart wandered, close to places he had long buried. Across the room, she was threading leather through itself, making something small and strong, a pouch maybe, or a memory in the making. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, like they were doing what they'd always known, reclaiming something without needing to explain it. Sam watched her, not with desire, not yet, but with wonder. Why her? Why now? What door had the wind blown open? She caught his gaze, didn't smile, didn't turn away. "You don't fear them," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "Why?" He looked into the fire. "Because I've already lost what most men fear to lose." She nodded. "I haven't, but I've nearly." Outside, a coyote called, thin and lonely. He listened, said nothing. "I won't ask you to keep me," she said, "but I won't leave unless you tell me to." He looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't soft, not like his wife had been. There was no gentleness, no easy warmth. She carried storm, silence, and the unbending will of something that refused to die. She was what rose from burned land, not a flower, but a root. He didn't say she could stay. He didn't tell her to go. He just stood, threw another log on the fire, and watched as she returned to her work. The world shifted again, quiet and sure, one breath closer to whatever came next. Outside, the marks of 70 horses remained in the snow, a message written in movement, warning, promise, or fate itself. And somewhere inside Sam Ward, something old stirred, like a fiddle string, drawn tight again after years of silence. The next morning came slow and pale. The sky was stretched thin, the color of worn linen. Snow still clung to the earth, but its bite had softened. The edge of winter was no longer a blade, just a cold breath, lingering. Sam stepped out into the hush, his boots leaving new imprints atop yesterday's warnings. The chief's words sat in him like stones. In a pocket, 2 days. He filled the hours the way men do when they're waiting for something they can't name. Checking tack, feeding horses, mending wire. The girl moved through the cabin, like smoke turned real. She said little, but her hands stayed busy. She swept the hearth without being asked, stacked plates after meals, folded and refolded blankets. And once, near dusk, Sam stepped outside and found the woodpile fuller than he'd left it. She was just coming back, her arms empty now, eyes focused. She didn't need to explain. They still spoke little. Words came carefully, chosen like water during drought. But the silence between them had shifted. It was no longer a wall. It had become a room, one they both stood inside, even if neither named it. She asked for his wife's name one afternoon. It was the first time her voice came with intention. "Marjorie," Sam said, quiet as snow, settling on old wood. She didn't say anything in return. But later, he noticed the shawl. Marjorie's shawl, the one she used to wear while baking, folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The girl had taken the other instead, the one draped over the chair. He didn't mention it. Just watched her more after that. Not with want, not with heat, with something closer to an ache, quiet and curious. She was younger than the weight in her eyes suggested. There was silence in her, yes, but it wasn't vacant. It was the kind born from having listened too long before being allowed to speak. She had a way of watching animals that reminded him of Marjorie. Head tilted slightly, like she was trying to learn their tongue. One morning, he found her near the coop, crouched low, offering a scrap of biscuit to the same hen that had bloodied his hand once. The bird took it gently. That evening, he handed her a piece of leather, sun-warmed and supple. "Thought you might want to make something from it." She took it, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Thank you." Just 2 words, soft, but they landed like stone in a still pond. In the evenings, they sat near the fire, not touching, not needing to. Once she sang, softly, a lullaby in Comanche, all wind and sand, and things that don't translate. He didn't ask what the words meant, he only listened. And slowly, he began to speak again. Not stories, just scraps. She learned he had once been a medic during the war, the one where brothers broke each other over lines drawn in blood. He said he came west not for gold, but for the quiet. "Silence suits me," he told her. She didn't press him with questions. He liked that, liked her stillness, her way of letting him be unfinished. One evening, as the sky turned to bruise, Sam came back from town with a pack slung over his shoulder. Miss Lahi, the storekeep, had watched him strange when he asked for tea, fabric, and an extra tin cup. "You've got company?" she'd asked, voice like a nail in dry wood. "Someone passing through," he'd said. Her eyes narrowed. Passing through or putting roots down? He didn't answer. "She's a Comanche girl, isn't she?" she whispered, the word low, like it might go sour if said too loud. "They have a way of turning even the quiet ones wild." He paid without another word and left. That night, he laid the fabric on the table. Blue cotton, simple but clean. No speech, no explanation. She stared at it for a long time before reaching out and brushing her fingers over it like it might vanish. She didn't speak, but her eyes said something close to thank you. By morning, she was already sewing it into a tunic, her hands moving with the kind of precision that looked like instinct. The firelight caught on the needle. Her eyes flicked toward the window now and then. Sam noticed. "Expecting them before tomorrow?" She nodded. "They won't wait." He didn't ask if she was afraid. Later, wind rose sharp across the plains. Clouds dragged low and thick like wool soaked in rain. Sam saddled his mare and rode out to the ridge overlooking the trail. He saw nothing. Not yet. But he felt it. A pressure in the air, like breath held too long. When he came back, the cabin smelled of broth. She'd used the supplies he'd brought. Beans, carrot, a bit of pork. She handed him a bowl without a word, ladled one for herself, and they sat. It wasn't just a meal, it was the first that felt like more than survival. After, he stood by the hearth, watching the fire chew through pine. She stood just behind him, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. "I dreamed of a river," she said. Back home, I was small. My mother was washing my hair in the shallows. Her voice thinned. I hadn't thought of her in years. He turned a little, not all the way. She gone? She nodded. Winter, no medicine. His throat tightened, tried to shape comfort, failed. You remind me of her, she said. You listen the way she did. Like silence is a sentence you're still learning how to read. He didn't know what to do with that. So he offered the only truth he had. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. They didn't speak after that, but something gave, something shifted. The next day, he showed her how to shape rawhide into reins, how to knot them so they wouldn't slip, even under a pulling horse. She taught him another kind of knot, the kind used to bind sinew to arrow shafts. They worked side by side in the yard, wind curling around them, lifting hay and flecks of snow. It felt like building. It felt like learning a language they both already halfway knew. That evening, she braided his mare's mane. Her hands moved with the same care she gave to thread and firewood. Deliberate, quiet. When she looked up and caught him watching, she didn't turn away. She smiled. Just the smallest one. The curve of her lips undid something in him. She stayed by the fire longer that night, not because he asked her to, but because she chose to. And he didn't move. When she leaned her head against the edge of his chair, her hair brushing the fabric of his shirt, he didn't pull away. They sat like that, two shadows, stitched together by warmth and silence, that felt less like absence and more like understanding. He wanted to speak, wanted to tell her, I don't know what this is, but it's more than silence. He wanted to tell her about the dreams, how they'd returned after so many years of drought. Dreams of holding his daughter again, of Marjorie's laughter catching in the spring wind like a ribbon through cottonwood branches. But he didn't. He let the fire speak instead. Let the quiet settle between them, like a blanket passed from one soul to another. The next morning brought tracks in the snow again, not near the cabin, not yet, but close. Close enough that the world felt smaller, more fragile. Sam watched her from the porch. She stood by the cedar tree, her hand pressed flat against its bark, her eyes closed. She looked like someone praying without sound, or saying goodbye. You think they'll take you? He asked when she returned, her steps quiet against the porch wood. They'll try, she said. He felt the words crawl up his throat before he could stop them. I could leave, ride with you, get you past the ridge. She shook her head, not dismissing him, but grounding him. If you run, they'll chase harder. They'll think you took me, that it was conquest, not choice. His jaw clenched, that old ache of helplessness flaring in his chest. And if I tell them otherwise? They won't believe you. Not at first. You're not one of them. You're not one of us. He stared at her then, the fire behind him crackling low, and asked, Then what are we? Her eyes found his, dark and fierce and hurting, but somehow still tender. Maybe we're the language between. That night the storm came, but not with snow, with wind, with dust, and a sky stitched with restless clouds. They sat close by the fire, knees nearly touching, breath falling into rhythm, like two hearts learning how to speak again. And finally, he told her about the daughter buried beneath the cottonwood tree, about how he never gave her a name, how he couldn't, because naming something meant believing it had lived, and he couldn't bear the weight of that. She didn't say much, only reached for his hand and held it. Her fingers were rougher than Marjorie's had been, but warmer, stronger. I think she lived, she said softly, even if only in your dreams. He couldn't speak after that, not with his throat closing up the way it did. He wanted to kiss her, but he didn't. The moment didn't ask for a kiss. It only asked for nearness. They slept in the same room that night. Him in the chair, her on the bed, but neither of them truly slept. The air was too full, too heavy, waiting. In the dark, he whispered, "What's your name?" For a moment, only the wind replied. Then, from the bed, she answered, "Nahili." He repeated it, slow, as though the syllables were foreign coin he didn't yet know how to spend. Nahili. She inhaled like she hadn't heard it said aloud in years. Outside, the wind shifted again, and morning, the final morning, waited just beyond the edge of sleep. When it came, morning brought no color, just a pale sky stretched tight like ash-smeared linen. The world had changed overnight. It no longer felt like a place to rest. It felt like a drumhead stretched too thin, humming with tension, the kind that split when struck. Sam stood on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, his eyes fixed to the horizon. There was no more room for guessing. The Comanche would return today. The line had already been drawn, not with swords or words, but with silence, with hooves that circled this house and eyes that made no promises. Inside, Nahili moved with the precision of someone preparing for ceremony or battle. She tied her tunic with leather cord, braided her hair back, checked the stitching on the bandage around her arm. She did not look like a girl hoping to be saved. She looked like a woman ready to meet whatever would come. Sam watched her from the doorway, one hand still holding the blanket shut at his chest. He wanted to ask her what she planned to do, but part of him already knew. She hadn't come here for safety. She stayed because here she had chosen. And now that choice stood like a sharpened blade, waiting to be named. He poured coffee, though his hands shook just enough to spill across the counter. She joined him. They sat in silence at the table, trying to memorize the stillness before it shattered. She spoke first. "They will want me to return, not just because I am the daughter of a chief, but because I left without permission. They see me as belonging." He looked at her then, his voice low but steady. "You don't belong to anyone."